Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Alhaitham Post-Release Analysis. As usual, for the post-release, it's pretty straightforward. I go through my pre-release video, I correct myself in places where I'm wrong, I add more information in things that I didn't mention enough, and yeah, that's basically it. So let's just get right into it. So his E has a special internal cooldown where he effectively doesn't... Yeah, so that is indeed the case. They did not change it from beta, so he does have a special ICD on his E where he has technically a time rule of like 12 seconds, but realistically no time rule. Like, it doesn't matter what the time rule is, but a hit rule of 2, meaning that when you're doing 3 mirrors, you'll get 2 spreads on your first proc of 3 mirrors and on every other proc of 3 mirrors. However, unlike Nahida, he needs to be on field to do them, right? Which is the biggest difference between them, is that Alhaitham basically doesn't really have any off-field presence. Technically, if you it's something that can be a problem. Him not having any off-field presence, like, it makes sense because he's not meant to have any off-field presence, but in a lot of the teams where you play him, he would be significantly stronger if he did. And like, you can really feel the lack of off-field in a bunch of the teams, especially the Hyperbloom teams, where if you try to play him as solo Dendro, it almost doesn't feel like you're playing a Hyperbloom team because you just don't get that many seeds. You still get enough to justify playing it potentially. Like, we'll get into teams later, but yeah, like the lack of off-field presence is definitely something you can feel. However, unlike Nahida, his EM to useful stats conversion isn't as good, which means that whereas for Nahida you would generally want to go sometimes double or even triple EM, in Alhaitham's case, that's generally not going to be ideal. Yeah, right? I'd say that's pretty fair, right? On Nahida, very often you do want to go triple EM or double EM. On Alhaitham, like, it's technically a thing you can do if your artifacts are really good and you don't have great alternatives on like Dendro damage, for example, but you still would rather stick to EM Dendro crit. Normal attacks basically just suck, and so do his charge attacks. Most of his damage is coming from his E projection attacks, so just do whatever when it comes to like your normal attack combos. Honestly, I kind of stand by that. I know that there's people that have been like looking into like his normal attack combos and which ones line up the best and shit, but honestly, in my experience, it just doesn't really make much of a difference. As long as you're getting the procs that you're supposed to get on your E, which honestly is kind of hard not to if you're actually hitting the enemies. Right, he gains 2 stacks from his E, 1 stack from a charge or plunge attack. If you just do E and then charge or plunge attack, generally you try to do plunge. What's gonna happen is you're gonna get basically 2 procs of 3 mirrors. But even if you do a suboptimal attack combo, you need to f it up really bad to not get 2 procs. Because the way that it happens is you get your first proc at, like, after like 1 second, and then you get your second proc after like another 1.5. Which means you have like almost a whole second and a half of wiggle room where even if you're not doing the exact perfect attack combo for him to be hitting, like, he'll still get the proc, because you can't really get a third 3 mirror proc, and you generally just, you care mostly for the 3 mirror procs, right? And so because you can't get a third one, it's like if instead you do the burst into E into charge attack combo, you have a little bit less wiggle room, because instead of getting 2 you get 4, which means that instead of it being 1.5 seconds on 2 procs, it's 1.5 seconds on 4 procs, which makes it a little tiny bit tighter, but honestly not that much still. So it's not really the end of the world. Now when it comes to like rotations, you generally are going to want to set up some stuff, use your burst, and then if you have low enough ping, you can swap out and then use like either Dendro main character skill or anything else really, and then swap back into him before 2 seconds. After that, yeah, it seems like the wiggle room that you have is a little bit more generous than I expected it to be. I mean, obviously it's always going to depend on what ability you need to do, but even with like 150-ish ping, you can still be fine with your swaps if it's not something that has a long animation, right? Like something like in Nahida E, you should be fine doing. But again, right, it's one of those things where like if your ping isn't stable, it's risky to do it, because if you mess up your timing a little bit, you lose all 3 mirrors, right? Which is abysmally bad. That you basically just attack, and after a bit less than 4 seconds, you use your charge attack or your E. And then after another a bit less than 4 seconds, you use the other one, and that gets you another 4 seconds of 3 mirrors. Then okay, that was the other one. Editing mistake, I think. Yeah, should be 4 seconds. I do think that's the general combo, but there is another combo that you can do that isn't always going to work, but it's good to know about it because it works in different situations. So if you're in a situation where the other combo is better, then it's good to know that it exists. Generally, right, there's no rotation with Alhaitham that will get you more than 6 3-mirror procs per rotation, right? 6 is basically your upper limit, right? If you do it with burst, okay, so you can do like your thing, very cool, and then Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And then after that, you get a 2 mirror proc. Right, so you'll get all 6 3 mirror procs. There is another rotation you can do though, where because his Constellation, not Constellation, sorry, Ascension 1 passive has a 12-second cooldown. If your rotations are longer than 24 seconds, then you could potentially trigger 2 of them per rotation. By the way, this is a C1 Alhaitham, so don't pay too much attention to the skill cooldown, please and thank you. So 1, 2, and then you swap out, right? Because you're not gonna get a third 3 mirror proc anyways. Very cool, you do your stuff. Then you get 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you wouldn't get another one, right? And if you do it that way, then you can get still those 6 3 mirror procs. However, there are things that could prevent you from doing it well. So there is a 12-second cooldown, which means that if your rotation is a little scuffed and you get up a little bit, there is no indicator of whether it's on cooldown or not. So sometimes you'll just go back to him, you'll do your stuff, and oh, I'm on 2 mirrors now. I'm not on 3 mirrors. That sucks. I'm not happy with that. That's not very cool. And by the way, the reason why we hold E instead of tap E is because if you tap E and you do charge attack, we get a 2 mirror proc, right? Because we get our 3rd mirror after we do the normal attack. We get it on the charge attack, which means that we get our proc before we get our 3rd mirror, and so we only get 1 instead of 2. Whereas if you do this, you get your 3 and it procs instantly, which is something that I hadn't mentioned in the pre-release. So that's one correction / addition. Another upside of the like, we'll call it the split uptime rotation, where you use your E and plunge, and you swap, and then you go back to him and you burst, and then you use charge attack to get the A1 again. Another upside to it is that you don't need to have your burst at the beginning of the rotation, which means that if you've cleared a chamber and you didn't get your burst back, on the next chamber, instead of having to funnel, you can just do that rotation, right? Because you don't have your burst, and still start well, and be vibing, and then go back to him, and then you might have your burst by the time you need it anyways. Another advantage is that if you are in Hyperbloom teams, where the amount of Dendro application that you have and like where exactly it lines up in your rotation is very relevant, those split uptime rotations are a lot better at adapting and like staying on field if you're going to be staying on him when he has 2 or 1 mirror, because you can get just more uptime total, right? If you want to stay on him for longer. It's not going to be 3 mirror uptime, so it's not ideal, but like it's still a thing, right? And so in teams where he's, for example, solo Dendro Hyperbloom, having that more consistent Dendro application can be pretty helpful. This is some way to play him that you will only do in longer rotations. And in longer rotations, your Nahida or your Dendro MC are generating more energy, because Nahida's skill is proccing more often and DMC can cast his skill more often. Because your rotations are longer, then you need less ER. But it's not because of this. Like, this thing doesn't change the amount of ER he needs. But yeah, as a general rule, you can count the amount of 3 mirror procs that you get and just swap out instantly as soon as you get the last one that you can. Because after you've gotten 2, if you start with your E, you know you won't get another one, so you can swap out of him instantly and you don't have to keep attacking and just do pathetic piss poor damage, right? You can do this, and then you get another one, and then you can instantly swap out and do your stuff, and you can come back to him later. Now here I get 1, 2, 3, 4, and can swap out instantly because I know that I won't be able to get it. And here, right, because rotation wasn't actually long enough, because we don't have other people, we don't have other characters in the party, we did not get 3 mirrors when we did our E plunge, because the A1 passive wasn't off cooldown. But yeah, hopefully you get the idea, right? Basically, right, for his combos, you're generally getting either 2, 4, or 6 procs of 3 mirrors every time he goes on field. So just keep that in mind, and when it's your last mirror, you don't have to stay for him. You don't have to stay on him any longer, but you can if you want more energy, or if the enemies are about to be dead and you don't want to start another rotation and stuff like that. He has a pretty large amount of flexibility in that way, where where you can adapt your rotations very, very easily to like situational stuff like the enemy's almost dead, or this enemy has a phase where it's invulnerable, so there's no reason for me to be doing my rotation normally. Then you look at his constellations. Effectively what this does is not that much. You'll get 6 of them basically, but like 2 of them are gonna happen before you. Yeah, okay, so this is kind of true, but also if you do end up doing the split uptime rotation, C1 should be able to get you better uptime on your thing, right? You should be able to do split uptime with, right, because this is an account that has C1, right? So I guess I can test it. But yeah, you should be able to do I fucked it up a little bit. But you are able to use your E twice per rotation if you do the split uptime thing. Actually, you probably kind of can't, now that I think about it. So you always start with burst or E hold, plunge, get 2 mirror procs, swap out, and then burst, 2 mirror procs, and then charge 2 mirror procs, right? With C1, you could potentially do charge 2 mirror procs, E 2 mirror procs, or E 2 mirror procs, charge 2 mirror procs, but then that means that either your E or your Ascension 1 isn't gonna be ready at the beginning of your next rotation. So I was right on this in the pre-release. It doesn't do that much. Having your abilities be off cooldown is better than having them be on cooldown, because it always gives you more flexibility, but it just doesn't do that much. There's not much to say about his cons. Basically all his cons suck except C6. C6 is pretty good, because like C2 is like, wow, very cool. Like it's good, but it's just, I mean, it's 200 EM, I guess. Like that's cool. And C4, it's 30% dendro damage. But then C6 retroactively makes C4 better because it makes you also get this, and it just, whatever. His cons are not particularly good, and generally if you want to increase your Alhaitham's damage, you're better off going for Nahida C2 than Alhaitham C2. That should tell you all you need to know about the value of his constellations. Okay, 5 stars, then you've got his free-to-play option. I mean, we can just go off of like the list at the end. Do I still stand by this? Light first, Jade Cutter second, Miss Splitter. Well, Jade Cutter, Miss Splitter, and Haran are like kind of all interchangeable, with Haran being a little bit worse. Freedom's Horn is also pretty good, but nothing crazy. Zyphos can actually be very good. Umbrella, best free to play. Yeah. I mean, I'd say that's like all basically more or less accurate. What about Black Sword? It's like, it's about as good as the Umbrella and Iron Sting. It's a thing that you can use if you want, because it does give you a little bit of healing, which is like fine, but it's not like a better option for damage. It's just kind of just along with the others. And that all goes back to how garbage his normal attacks are, and most of his damage just comes from his E, which means that Black Sword is just not really as good as it usually is, right? It's just the crit rate, basically. And the Umbrella and the Iron Sting have the EM and some damage percent on the passive, which is why they end up being somewhat similar. Let's even use right. Yeah, I mean, okay. So for the ER requirements, I think I was a little bit too harsh on how important it is to use his burst every rotation. You can decide not to, and like it's fine. You don't have to use his burst. I just prefer the rotations where you do. But it's definitely something that you can just decide that you don't care about it that much. Like it's not a big loss, basically. His burst is effectively what lets him stay on 3 mirrors for a long time. Without his burst, he basically can't do that. In some teams that matters a bit more than others, but as a general rule, like it's not the end of the world if you spend some time on 2 mirrors. It's not great, it's not what you want, but it's not that bad. You do lose a pretty reasonable amount of damage, but if it saves you a lot of ER, it can still be fine. Finally, teams. And I guess here's where we should talk about his strength. And the thing about him is that he's Dendro. And just from being a Dendro on-fielder, he can be the driver for a Hyperbloom team that can clear 36 star with no problem. Or you can build him kind of like he's supposed to be and have him be a spread carry. Because that floor is so high, and because the amount of investment that's required to basically reach 36 star if you play your teams well with those Dendro teams is so low, then that means that if you're looking at these units at floor level, then it means that, well, yeah, Alhaitham is one of the best units to go for. Probably not better than the good supports, but if you're comparing him to carries, he's probably going to be better because he's part of Dendro teams, and Dendro teams' floor is so high that the only real... Okay, so I still very much believe all of this. I think that hasn't really changed. One thing that I do want to add, though, is when I did the Alhaitham pre-release, I still hadn't looked into Yao Yao that much. And now that I have, and now that she's been out, and now that I've tested her, she has far exceeded my expectations. Yao Yao is a very good unit, which means that argument of like you already have good Dendro units, if you do Lantern right and you get her from there, applies to Yao Yao as well. You can just guarantee that you have a Yao Yao without having to spend any Primo gems. And I'd say that Yao Yao is most definitely better than Kole. And I tweeted a few days ago, hot take, Yao Yao is the second best unit since 3.0. And it's like a little bit of a hyperbole, but not that much. Yao Yao is a like actual very good unit that works well. Like she's not a carry, she's not meant to be a carry, she's not going to be the main source of your team's damage. But when you put her in Dendro teams that are built properly around her, right? If you put her in Hyper Bloom teams, if you put her in Quicken teams just as like the Dendro, they're actually really good teams. And that's before even looking at the fact that she's a healer. Taking that, her being a healer into consideration and knowing that most people care a lot about having a healer on their team is why I do kind of think that Yao Yao is the second best unit since 3.0 after Nahida. But that's like even more of an argument kind of against needing to get Alhaitham because she improved by a pretty significant amount your teams where you would have had to run Kole before, and that's pretty valuable, right? The increase that you get from adding Alhaitham to your account is lower because your account without Alhaitham got stronger, right? The Yao Yao did that. And also, right, just to make it very clear, I'm not saying that Yao Yao is objectively the second best unit in Sumeru. I think that you can make a very strong argument for Yao Yao, for Alhaitham, and for Nilo. All three of them have a very well-defined strengths that is like pretty useful and pretty good. But yeah, so like this, right, that's basically what it boils down to is what do you want to do with your account? And I think I made it pretty clear what Alhaitham is good at in this video, right? It's he's very good at relatively closer to floor level investment. Just having more Dendro options is always nice. Although one thing I haven't really talked about too much is like when you do get to high investment, characters like him and Nahida start separating themselves a bit more from characters like DMC and Yao Yao and those characters because, well, when you start getting like actual really good artifacts and stuff like that, then it makes it so that, like I've talked about right earlier here, with transformative reactions, you get relatively close to your ceiling without needing that much resin, right? The difference in damage between, like in DPS, between someone who has no EM in their substats and someone who has a 120 EM substat flower and feather is actually not that big. Whereas the difference in damage when you're not a character focused on transformative reactions, if you play Alhaitham in a spread team, can be a little, like quite a bit bigger, right? It scales a lot better with high investment. And because it scales better with high investment, then when you start getting to high investment, characters that are good in spread and stuff like that become better. And characters that don't gain that much from those reactions, you look at DMC's garbage like damage numbers, and not just from the reactions, also just from being able to hit, right? But you look at DMC's garbage damage and a relatively slow Dendro application, you look at Kole's everything, you look at Yao Yao's relatively high field time requirements that prevent you from on-fielding someone else in a bunch of situations, and then you can start seeing how Alhaitham can separate himself from those characters when you get to like very high investment. However, when you are at that high investment, I don't think that Alhaitham is quite as good as some of the non-Dendro units. Although he can definitely give them a run for their money. Like when you start looking at high investment stuff, you're also competing with Hu Tao and single target. You're competing with Ayako and enemies are freezable, and that can be harsher competition, basically. But one of the nice things about him is that he's quite good at floor, and he's also quite good at ceiling. It's just he's not the best at either. When it comes to just replacing Nahida, basically, he's gonna be kind of an inferior version of Nahida because, well, his energy requirements are stricter, he doesn't have any real off-field presence, but if you don't have Nahida, well, you're not comparing him to Nahida, you're comparing him to, like, Dendro main character, and if your team allows for having an on-field driver, he's probably gonna be better, and he's actually pretty good. If you do have Nahida, and you use her on one team, you can still use him. Yeah, right, like, that's another impact of Yao Yao is that's kind of less true, because there are a lot of the teams where previously you would have played DMC, where Yao Yao is kind of just a better option now, and in those teams, a lot of them don't have dedicated healers, and so being able to run Yao Yao over Alhaitham would be a pretty big upside. Okay, so I do think these are generally his best options. I don't like him that much in Double Hydro Hyper Bloom. It's fine again if you don't have another option. but all in all, I'm not that big of a fan. And double Electro Quick Bloom, I also don't like him that much. I'd say that where he shines most is generally going to be in double Dendro, Quick Bloom or Hyper Bloom, and then Quicken teams where you don't get any blooms. I would lean more towards the Hyper Bloom and Quick Bloom teams, but when you start getting at high investment, I mean, the account I've tested on today, because I wanted to do some more testing on a few teams that I couldn't test before because I didn't have access to accounts that had the units for them. But the account that I'm testing on today is a little strong. So at this level of investment, Quicken teams start becoming very, very, very strong. And on this account, I've preferred the Quicken stuff to the Quick Bloom and Hyper Bloom stuff. Burgeon, yeah, honestly, I wouldn't recommend him in Burgeon. I feel like it's just, why? Don't do that to yourself, man. And then Bountiful Bloom, I've tried it. I can see the appeal of it. I think that generally in the kind of situations where Nilo is good, Alhaitham won't be too good. But he is a unit that has pretty decent like base damage, which means that when you're in situations that are shit for Nilo in single target stuff like that, having Alhaitham will make it so that you don't struggle quite as much, but it also makes you weaker against your strengths. So at the end of the day, I don't like him very much in Nilo teams, but he's definitely playable there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitch, all that. True. And I'll say do those things. True. I'd say that like all in all, I'll give myself a 7 out of 10 in terms of how accurate of a pre-release this was. I don't think I got anything like wrong, but there's definitely a few things that I should have mentioned and I didn't, right? Mentioning the hold E into plunge, letting you actually get 2 procs of 3 mirrors, whereas E into charge attack, you lose a proc because your first attack happens before you get your 3rd mirror. And also because at the time I underestimated Yao Yao, that impacted how I spoke about alternatives to him. I guess I also didn't talk much about like non-Nahida Dendro teams. They're fine, right? Like if you go him with Yao Yao or him with DMC, but those are not the kind of teams where I'd be like, yeah, I'm happy having Alhaitham on my account. It's a way to make him work if you don't have Nahida and you like him, but I'd say that if that's how you intend on playing him, there's probably better options for your account if you're not pulling because you like him, just pulling because you think he's strong. So that basically does it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to do all the things I mentioned earlier, right? All the likers, any subscribers, any. Why are you?
Praise your Father who art in heaven, hear me.
Oh,
You. Let me do our outro. Bye, YouTube.